Okay. All right, so thank you for being here, folks, online and in person. Okay, finally. Okay, so this is our Spring Steinbeck Fellows reading. I am the program coordinator for the Steinbeck Fellows, also an associate professor of English and creative writing. I do not know what that weird sound is. Hopefully it stops. Anyway, Keenan Norris, and I'll be leading us through our proceedings today. I do want to say that we're really appreciative of all of our current 2023-2024 Steinbeck Fellows, and tonight we will feature the work of Amanda Rizkalla, Alexia Nader, and Francisco Gonzalez. Francisco, unfortunately, can't be here in person due to a recent fall and surgery, and so but I will be reading from his work in his stead. So that we wanted to state that. So we're gonna get started. All right. So first, land acknowledgement. This has a couple parts to it. This land acknowledgement is provided by the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. The San Jose State University community recognizes that the present-day Muwekma Ohlone tribe, with an enrolled Bureau of Indian Affairs document membership of over 550, is comprised of all the known surviving American Indian lineages aboriginal to the San Francisco Bay region, who trace their ancestry through the Mission, Santa Clara, San Jose, and Dolores during the advent of Hispano-European Empire into Alta California, and who are the successors and living members of the sovereign, historic, previously federally recognized Verona Band of Alameda County. Furthermore, the San Jose State University community recognizes that the university is established within the Bameen Ohlone-speaking tribal ethno-historic territory, which, based upon the unratified federal treaties of 1851 through 1852, includes the unceded ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. Some of the enrolled Muwekma lineages are descended from direct ancestors from the Bameen Ohlone tribal territory, whose ancestors had affiliation with Mission Santa Clara. I also want to say that this land acknowledgement means nothing if it simply exists in the past tense or without historical context. We need to acknowledge the land back movement on this continent, and on a global level, we must confront the human toll of settler colonialism and genocide as it is being borne out in Palestine and South Sudan and elsewhere around the world. For more information on the occupation of native lands, you can go to native-land.ca. All right. Some information about the Steinbeck Fellowship, real briefly. The Steinbeck Fellows program of San Jose State University was endowed through the generosity of Martha Heasley Cox. It offers writers of any age and background a $15,000 fellowship to finish a significant writing project. Named in honor of the author John Steinbeck, the program is guided by his lifetime of work in literature, the media, and environmental activism. Fellowships are currently offered in creative writing in all prose genres. Sorry, poets. Wow. Unless you also write prose, then it's all good. And Steinbeck Studies. Fellows may be appointed in many fields, including literary scholarship, fiction, drama, education, science, and the media. Graduate Steinbeck Fellows as well. This is another branch of the program. The Steinbeck Center also supports up to 6 exceptional incoming students in San Jose State's MFA Creative Writing and MA English programs with full in-state tuition for their first year of study. All applicants to the 2 programs are considered for these fellowships, and there is no additional application for that. We'll post the link to more information for the Steinbeck Fellows program, but you can just Google SJSU Steinbeck Fellows and it'll come up. You know, in recent years, the Steinbeck Fellows program has made a great impact across our literary landscape. 2 former fellows, Aro Kwan and Uche Okonkwo, have books that have been published this spring, are Okwan's exhibit, and Uche's debut story collection, A Kind of Madness. In 2022, former fellow Vanessa Waugh's novel, Forbidden City, became a bestseller, and Shruti Swami's novel, The Archer, won the California Book Award. The late Anthony Vyazna-So's story collection, After Parties, received the 2021 National Book Critics Circle Award. And that same year, Steinbeck Fellow Meron Hidero was awarded the AKO Kane Prize for a short story, Street Sweep. Meron has since gone on to publish a short story collection, A Down-Home Meal for These Difficult Times, as well. All right, so before we come to our current Steinbeck Fellows who are here virtually, in person, and in spirit to read with us today, I want to announce our 2024-2025 Steinbeck Fellows. I want to say, as an introduction to this, that we received a record number of applications for the Steinbeck Fellowship. This was the most competitive process that we've ever been through as a committee of judges. This is far from a one-person operation, but really requires the hard work of so many people. And I will thank all of y'all a little later on, but I want to speak to that, and to the many, many excellent applications, far more, excellent applications than we have the capacity as an institution to award. That said, we are very proud of our incoming class, which includes Thea Chakamati, who earned her MFA from the University of Michigan. She lives in the Bay Area with her family, where she is at work on a short story collection and a novel. Also, Joe Dornich, who is the author of the story collection The Ways We Get By. Joe lives in California and teaches at Cal State San Bernardino. Abdul Rahman El-Gindi is an Egyptian writer, translator, and activist based in Pittsburgh, whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, Guernica and Agni. He was a political prisoner for 6 years in Egypt before coming to the United States and becoming a journalist and creative writer. Desiree Evans writes fiction for children, teens, and adults, and has been a Combilio and Callaloo Fellow, both fellowships that are really well regarded, especially in the world of African American letters. And Desiree has been recognized by the Hurston Wright Foundation and the NEH, among other institutions. Chino Lee Chung is a queer Chinese-Mexican essayist working on an essay collection that integrates activism and his intersectional identities. A longtime grassroots activist, he was instrumental in changing a California law so that trans people now have the dignity of their chosen gender indicated in their death records. And Emily Yang believes in the need to write against the logics of empire and capital toward the horizon of collective liberation, and is currently working on a mytho-speculative novel about a shape-shifting fox spirit. All right, if we can just get a quick round of applause. Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge our graduate Steinbeck Fellows, also incoming. Taylor Hooten, Jesus Uloa, Charmaine Sun, who is here in the audience, Liam Leslie, Jake Olhausen, and Christina Molfino. So congratulations as well. Okay, so our first reader for the evening is joining us via the internet, via Zoom. Amanda Rizkalla is a writer from Los Angeles, California. Her work appears in the Boston Review, No Tokens Journal, and The Fabulist, among several other publications. A graduate of Stanford University, she has received fellowships and support from the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, and Blue Mountain Center. Her work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and was selected as a finalist for the James Jones First Novel Fellowship and the Outpost Residency. She received her MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she was awarded the Kemper K. Knapp Graduate Fellowship. Amanda, thank you for being here, and we are all ears.
Thank you, Keenan, for that introduction. And thank you also to the Steinbeck Center and the Fellowship for its incredible support of all of us fellows this year. It's been such a gift to be allowed the time to really immerse ourselves in our stories, our novels, our memoirs. And thank you so much for making that possible for all of us. So tonight I will be reading from my novel, and I'll start about 10 pages in. In terms of context, all you really need to know is that there's a mom, a daughter, and a son who have sort of abruptly decided to leave the dad. And they're kind of in this state of limbo, figuring out what to do next. All right. When Mama goes to work on Monday morning, we wait in the car with the windows rolled down. The air gusts inside, cooling off the car seats, the vinyl hot, steaming. It feels too humid, too hot, too sticky for the second week of November. Rafa starts to fidget around noon before Mama is supposed to meet us for her lunch break. His stomach growls an angry growl, and mine a sad, low drone, and he declares himself the winner of empty stomachs. He wants a prize. "Peanut butter cookies, please," he says. "Coming right up," I say, and pretend to crack an egg into a bowl, mixing it with a plastic spoon I found under my seat. We cup the invisible dough in our hands, flattening the cookies into discs between our palms. When I take them out of the oven, tissue box, I can almost smell them. Nutty and roasted and sweet. Rafa pouts. "I want real ones," he says. "I know," I say. "Me too." The heat in the car is like an aunt who does not stop smothering us. Even with the windows open all the way, the heat is hugging us, kissing us, pinching our cheeks. Its perfume, hot, hot vinyl, is sharp in our noses. I try to read to Rafa, but my stomach ache makes me dizzy, and the words lift off the page and flit around me like lazy bugs, the letters sprouting wings to fly off to better places. To keep him from crying, he and I play counting games and then the quiet game, waiting for Mama. When we play I Spy, he tells me over and over again what he spies with his littlest eye, and it is always parking lot related because we are parked here behind the clinic. He spies lampposts, uniformed delivery men, and a folded in half parking ticket picked up by the wind, fluttering like a butterfly, free. On her lunch break, Mama walks us over to the library, still wearing her scrubs. The library is a one-story brick building with 2 white pillars up front sticking out like tusks, smooth and thin. To the left of the revolving door, there are red flowers shaped like doilies, plants with leaves as big as elephant ears. "Here," Mama says, reaching into her purse to hand an apple to Rafa and a pear to me, a handful of napkins to both of us. "From the break room," she says. I bite into the pear, its juice so sweet I feel like I have bitten into a sack of perfume, pale yellow juice dripping down off the side of my mouth. I wipe it with the back of my hand. "So, what do you say if someone wants to steal you?" she asks us with her hands on her hips. It is our ritual, her question, my answer. "Bet my mom would pay them to," I say. Mama winks. "That's right." When we finish, we toss the cores into the square mouth of the trash can. They reach the bottom in a thump. Mama pats Rafa's head, then ruffles his hair. "Be good," she tells him. "Listen to your sister." From 1 to 4, I find a book, a chair in the corner, and watch the sun settle around my neck in a warm stripe as I turn the pages. At 4:30, pink streaks the sky, like the time Mama stepped on the brakes too fast at an intersection and the tires scraped the road black. I walk through the aisles, passing through physiology, philosophy, parenting. In the parenting section, I thumb through a thick manual about adolescent child rearing and stop on a chapter titled Methods of Reinforcement, Positive or Negative. After skimming a few paragraphs, I decide that Baba used negative reinforcement, that positive reinforcement makes more sense to me, and that I will practice on my brother. Later that night, I turn on the overhead light on my side. It yellows the first page. For a few minutes, until my eyes get heavy and the words blur, unfocused, I am a girl on a farm, eating sun-ripened strawberries, real ones, flicking off the stems and leaves as if I were removing a green hat from the top of each strawberry, balding them. In the book, she must choose between man 1 and man 2. They have names, but I am so sleepy I cannot remember them, and besides, there are strawberries to eat. Strawberries so real, they could probably stain her shirt red. Mama drives us to a new market the next day. When we get there, I walk up to the lady with the red apron untied behind her back, the strings grazing the floor. I watch as she uses tongs to flip shrimp on the small grill, and they pop and sizzle into white noise. She presses one into the grill with the flat edge of her tongs, and it sputters garlic butter, steaming. My stomach grumbles. It smells like a restaurant. I point at the free sample sign. Can I have one? Of course. She puts one in a small cup, the red tail arching over the side, and I reach to take it. Is it okay if I take another one for my brother? I ask. I don't see why not, she says. She hands me another one. Shrimp, butternut squash ravioli, pour over coffee from Italy, handfuls of sample cups, extra coffee for Mama. We bring them back to the car and set them down on the center divider. Mama takes one of the instant rice bowls she bought, which she microwaved inside the store, and reaches inside the glove compartment for our 3 plastic spoons. She wipes each of them off with a napkin before handing them to us. We turn on the radio. She spins the knob, skipping back the stations, blips of static and mid-song belting and news coverage until she finds the Spanish station and turns it up loud. She divides the rice into 3, taking the smallest third for herself. I set down my spoon. So, what time did you go to sleep last night? She asks. Maybe midnight, I say. How is it so far? She says, motioning to the library book with her chin. I had tucked my pencil inside the book last night, holding my spot at chapter 3. Why does she get to stay up late? Rafa asks. She's reading. Reading's good for you. Mama takes a sip of her coffee, blowing it first so it cools. Well, I want to stay up late too, he says. Mama sighs. Do you want a book from the library? If I get a book, then I can stay up late, he asks. Only if you read it. Then no. Your choice, Mama says, then turns to face me. What were you saying? I smooth over the cover with my hand. Nothing. After we finish eating, Mama tells us to put on our seatbelts. Which way do you want to go? She asks. She starts to pull out of the market parking lot, waiting for a man to cross in front of her with a shopping cart, the little girl on his shoulders covering his eyes. The girl throws her head back with laughter, and her 2 braids swing back too. The man is smiling, toothy, pushing his cart slowly, steady, over the speed bump. There are apples and apples and apples in the grocery bags, I imagine. A gallon of milk, a carton of eggs, sliced bread, the usual. All of the usual things that people whose dads carry them like that over their shoulders would get at a market. Left, Rafa says, and I agree, left. After the man finishes crossing, Mama signals and we turn. Do you remember me telling you about this street? She asks. I used to buy oranges here when you were this small, she says, bringing her index finger and thumb this close together. Here at this corner, see? Rafa says he remembers. Can we buy some? No, she says. Next time. He frowns. That's what you always say. When the light turns green, she pulls into a parking lot a few blocks away from an old church with overgrown vines sprawling the stained glass windows, then turns the car off. There's a new market a few streets over, she says, twisting her keys out from the ignition. We'll go there tomorrow. The 3 of us tell each other what we wish we had. It is a game we play when none of us can sleep. We play it often. TV, Mama says. Strawberries, I say. Couch. My old room. My gaze shifts to Rafa, and I realize he has not offered one in a while. I nudge him from across the car. You got one? I ask. His cheeks are red. His lips are chapped. Slowly, he meets my gaze. Baba, he says. And I will stop there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Amanda. Let me unmute myself here. Thank you, Amanda. That was wonderful, and the poignant both beauty and tragedy of this story of your work shine through in this reading, as they did when we read your work in the application process and the judging process, I guess a year ago. Thank you. All right, 1 second. Gotta remember to take this with me. Okay, so next up is Alexia Nader, who is here with us. Thank you for being here. Alexia is a writer based in San Francisco. Her fiction has been published in Your Impossible Voice, her poetry in Obsidian, and her criticism in the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Nation, and Guernica, among other outlets. She received her MA in journalism from New York University, where she was a Dean's Fellow, and her MFA in fiction from the University of San Francisco, where she held a postgraduate teaching fellowship. She is currently working on her first novel. Alexia, come on.
Hello. So this year I've been working on my novel, which is entitled The Meaning of Daughter. And the novel is a multi-generational story narrated by 3 women in a family. And it traces the family's migrations from Lebanon to Haiti to the United States. I'll be reading from the section narrated by the first generation protagonist, Marijan. The beginning of the reading, just for context, occurs a few years after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, when Marijan, our protagonist, has decided to move from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to live with her daughter in Miami, Florida. No matter what I began painting, the image became my daughter. The images I painted told me I must see my daughter, and not just that, I must paint her from life, not from memory. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to listen to them. If I couldn't cross the water all those years ago as a young woman, what made me think I could do so now? And what was waiting for me on the other side but my daughter's anger? But I knew better than to ignore them, so I called my daughter and asked her if I could live with her. She did not respond at first. I took her silence as a good sign and began to think about what I would answer if she asked me why. My first answer, because I wanted to paint her, would only bring trouble. She had once accused me of caring more about my art than my children. Perhaps she was right. There was another answer to why I needed to go to her, but I couldn't find the words. Ask me a little later and I'll tell you, I planned to say, but she asked instead, how do you know you will like it here? You've never been outside Haiti. We both knew this was not true, but that she was saying, you are not like me. I leave, you stay. But she's wrong. The plane lifts into the air. The first moment of the earthquake runs through me again. I feel Ibrahim close, wait to see if it's time, press my St. Christopher coin into the palm of my hand until my skin changes around its grooves. The plane becomes horizontal again. I whisper to Elias, after I pass, take me back to Haiti, bury me next to my husband. My son's eyes are closed, his face relaxed. He pats my hand as if to tell me, enough, but he heard me. I open the window shade now that we are over the water. I could not face seeing Haiti disappear behind me. I did not choose to leave my first home. I remember its horizon in the northern mountains of Lebanon. The mountaintops surrounding my house appeared molded by giant feet, and the cedars exhaled in grand, sharp breaths in the forest beyond, while juniper trees replied with a daintier scent. Wild mint sprouted in tendrils from between the cottage's stones, and sour white cheese brewed in goatskin in the cellar. My family's life in Lebanon began and ended with the goats. My father came from a long line of goat herders. When I could not yet walk, my father took me in his arms and introduced me to the goats. Happy is he who has a shed to keep one goat in Mount Lebanon, the saying goes. People often misunderstand goats as only property, but years of herding had taught my father that goats have spirits. You can see it in their eyes, he said. They are not our eyes. See, they are on the sides of the head, because goats have twice the number of legs as people. My father placed my hand on the goat's head. It felt like a stone. The animal bleated. My father called them God's creation. When I could walk, the goats bullied me because I was small and traveled on two unsteady legs. They nipped at my only dress. They butt me with their heads, knocking me backwards. They taught resilience, balance, how not to trip on rough parts of the earth or fall into holes. My father once had a large enough flock to earn respect among the people of Eden and a peaceful family life. But a long famine and years of bad luck had reduced the flock to 3. When my father blamed my mother for the family's misfortune, it was not the goats he spoke of, but my brothers, who had died as infants during the famine. The daughter was the only child who had survived. How could that be, my father would wonder, filling the room where we slept with his accusations. My mother was a temptress like the bad women in the Bible and was being punished by God. She had dragged him into her disgrace. His love for her had made him weak, indecisive, and he had not traveled to the port city with his cousins in search of the ship that would take them to golden lands. God had punished him by taking away his sons. My mother did not tell him he was wrong, but she did not tell him he was right. My mother believed it was God's will that her sons had been taken away from her, and that her husband made her suffer for it. And it was not her place to question God's will, only to pray for better fortune. I thought of my father as Job, whom I had learned about in church. Job's fortune changed because God and Satan had begun to argue over how good Job was, and God wanted to show Satan he was right. Job had a large flock, but all his animals began to die, and so did his children. Job suffered until he stopped questioning God's power. When I was 5, my mother became pregnant, my father's fury abated, and for a few months, the 6 of us lived a peaceful life. My father tended to the flock. My mother milked the goats and turned their milk into cheese famous in the town for its fragrance and bite. I worked on giving my doll, which my mother had sewn for me out of brown scraps of cloth, a face. Just as the baby in my mother's belly.
Attention, the library will close to the public in 30 minutes. After 8 p.m., the library remains available to issue started with current cover cards. The library will close to the public in 30 minutes.
I couldn't have waited for the line break. Just as the baby in my mother's belly would belong to the family when he was born, the doll would belong to me. Sometimes it seemed pointless to speak to my doll when she had no eyes, but I tried anyway when my mother, tired of my chatter, would tell me to go play in the garden and I was alone. One day I heard the sound of strange shoes crunching soil, looked up and saw a man with wild hair. The man had brought a letter for my father from his cousin Joseph. My mother, the visitor, and I went to find my father. We found him climbing up the goat's preferred slope, where sharp, precariously positioned rocks led to the sweetest shrubs and the wild apple trees. His forehead glinted in the sunlight. He was surrounded by the sky's wide mouth. As my mother called out to my father, I turned to the visitor and asked him if I could touch his hair. He shook his mane and said he had been on a boat for weeks at sea where one could not cut one's hair. I was filled with curiosity and terror. I knew only one thing about the sea. God used it to punish men. My father could not read, and so, after it had been established where the visitor had come from, that he was indeed not a stranger, but the son of a good family from another neighboring town, he was invited to dinner so he could read the letter he had brought. I watched him scoop darfia, pita, and pickles into his mouth as if he had not eaten in a month. He paid his due compliments to my mother's cheese, saying he had dreamt of cheese this delicious during his travels. My mother's eyes feasted on the compliment, but she was careful not to let her husband see the pleasure she took in another man's words. We were eating from the secret store of flour, yeast, and olive oil, food my mother kept hidden behind the filled goatskins. When my mother went to Ehden to sell her cheese, she always stopped by her sister's house to beg for this extra food. This was a secret. If my father knew, he would demand she return the food and beat her, as her begging would be considered yet another betrayal. But my mother took the risk. She would not let her daughter die like her sons had because of her husband's pride. Sometimes I snuck down to the cellar, poured olive oil into my mouth, and felt it tickle the back of my throat. But at the table under my father's watch, I only dared to pick up one extra piece of pita. After we had finished eating, the man read the letter out loud. My father's cousin, Joseph, who had left at the beginning of the famine, now lived on an island none of us had ever heard of, an island whose name none of us could pronounce. On this island, he had become prosperous by buying and selling cloth. Joseph had written that he'd heard about the hard times that had fallen on my father, whom he called his dear cousin, and he would like to help him. He had sent enough money to buy passage to the island. His dear cousin should not be afraid. It would be a long journey, but family would be waiting on the other side. He had no sons and needed help with the store. My father had many questions. Where was this island? How long would it take to get there? Who lived there? What language did they speak? How could Joseph be making so much money by selling cloth? The man tried to answer as many of my father's questions as he could, but it was not until the man said that the island was Christian that my father began to consider the proposal. The money that Joseph had sent us was enough to live on for a long time, perhaps enough to buy a few more goats from one of the big families to fill out his flock. But what good was a bigger flock if there were no sons to give it to when a man's short time on this earth had ended? While the men spoke, I turned over one thing the visitor had said. He had called the people on the island black. How could people be black, I wondered. The shapes on the paper the visitor were holding were black. The centers of eyes were black. Did my father know what could be black about a person? But I must have known he didn't have the answer because I didn't ask him the question. A few days later, I rubbed my mother's sore back and temples in the blue light of our afternoon rest. My mother asked me to listen to her belly and tell her if the baby was a boy. I heard small thumps. I said I didn't know because I didn't want my mother to start crying. My mother had been crying for days. Mama, what is an island? I asked. My mother took my hand in hers and drew a circle on my palm. This is land, she said. She drew lines like snakes around her former gesture. And this is water. I tried hard to think of what I had seen that could be like an island. The circle of the sun surrounded by wavy lines of clouds, or a house surrounded by a freckled night sky, or a Noah's Ark with two of every animal in existence, two so that they could grow the world again after the flood. If my mother had another girl, to my father the girl would not exist at all, except as another proof of his curse. I had never heard my mother speak so firmly to my father as when she demanded she be able to stay with her sister in Ehden until the baby was born, so she could pray for a boy every day. I held the hem of my mother's dress in my mother's shadow. The land changed as we made our way into the valley. From above, steps cascaded down the low hills, but down the hill, the steps turned into entire forests of olive trees and smaller steps appeared. The new steps led to boxy stone cottages and up to olive trees with squat, gnarled bases and branches erect and brilliant as flames. My aunt greeted us with sesame cookies and strong tea. My mother confessed her fear. George would make them all leave to who knows where if she had a girl. The women turned serious, and I was sent to play with my cousins, who ignored me because I was too young to go to school. But I had my doll Merjan to talk to, and soon I might have a sister. I tried to imagine what my mother had meant when she said we would leave the cottage behind. How far would we walk? Would we be back before winter? What would happen to the goats? Would I be able to take my doll with us? My mother had forgotten to light a candle after hours of prayer. She told me to wait for her in front of the church. A woman in a long robe and a veil approached me and asked how old I was, who my parents were, and where they lived. The woman spoke Arabic like someone not sure what word should follow the last. She told me she hoped to see me at school soon. What school? I asked the strange woman. School is where you learn the important things, like how to read the Bible, the woman said. She was old, like the people on the street, who pinched my cheeks and gave me sweets. I held out my left hand. It recoiled when the woman slapped it. I ran into the church to find my mother. I asked my mother if she knew how to read the Bible. My mother said she knew the prayers. On the way home, an old woman at the market stuck a gnarled finger into a jar, fished out an olive, and placed it in the palm of her hand. Good girl, eat this for your skin, she said. I sucked on the olive's bitterness until it bloomed and disappeared. I spit out the pit. It was shaped like an eye. I held out my hand again. The old woman clucked and turned to my mother to bless the girl she was about to have. My mother despaired at the old woman's premonition. The old woman offered another olive. My mother passed it to me. Now one pit could keep the other company the way eyes do. Or is one eye lonely, not knowing the other exists, the way a face looks from the side? I kept the two pits safe for the day I found a way to attach them to my doll. 2 weeks later, baby Georgina gleamed with blood and brine, squirmed like she was trying to wriggle free of herself, and when the midwife slapped her on the bottom, opened her eyes to the women in the room. My father stood over one of the goats, a small knife tucked furtively into his side. Where were the other goats? I was not supposed to be watching him. He lay his own blanket on the ground and placed more tools than I had ever seen on it. He tucked the goat into one armpit. He hushed. He murmured in a tone more tender than any he'd ever used with me. He slit the goat's throat. Red sprang from the wound. The eye flattened. I ran toward the dead goat. My hands were too small to cover the slit across its throat. The wound gaped. I wailed deeply. I had heard the sound before, but I didn't know where or when. My father stared at me in awe. He pried my hands away from the river of blood and cradled me in his arms. He made excuses. His goats were for milk, not meat. But I must understand. If God willed it, it was meant to be.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. James Baldwin said very famously of his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, that it was the book he had to write if he was ever going to write anything else. And I feel very much, that sentiment, feeling with your work, and I cannot wait to read the novel. Apologize about these announcements. They've been happening with every one of these Steinbeck Fellows readings where I've been the only one in here. I just spare you with a mute button. Can't do that right now. All right, I do want to say that for folks both in attendance in person and online, there will be a Q&A at the end after I read from Francisco's work. So, if you are online and you have a question, feel free to place it in the chat. Folks in person, if you have questions either for Alexia, for Amanda, and even if you have questions for me about the Steinbeck Fellowship or whatever, happy to have a short Q&A. All right, so Francisco Gonzalez is a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University and a two-time winner of the O. Henry Prize, National Short Story Prize. His fiction appears in Gulf Coast, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, the Southern Review, Ziziva, and elsewhere. He holds an MFA from Columbia University. I'll be reading, as I said, from Francisco's work. I'm going to try to read this off the phone. Just give me a second. Please bear with me. And I'm going to be reading from the short story Serranos that just recently was awarded with the O. Henry Prize. All right. So you're Serranos, we said. Tell us, how bad are things in Chiapas? This was a rhetorical question. We knew about the peasants who had risen up against the government and been crushed. We knew about Subcomandante Marcos and Red Mask and the massacre of Acteal. It was the stuff of legend. The old woman who styled herself a mother grinned at us, and yet we detected a gloom passing behind her eyes. We could tell she was pretending not to be upset. So we pivoted. We asked the Serranos if they needed jobs. We explained that we earned our keep 3 miles up the road at a boutique winery of some renown, where grapevines crowned the terraced hills. The winery also had horses, hens, and goats. We cared for the animals, and we cared for the grapes. We poured samples for tourists, red, rosés, whites. We mentioned that our boss might need a few extra hands since it was now April, and fruit would soon appear on the vines. We can set you up, we offered, as long as you deliver. We didn't know what sort of people grew up in the southern mountains or what manner of work they'd be skilled at, but we hoped we might win them over by doing them a favor. Mother Paz shook her head. Thank you, but we have all of us farmed for the last time. Arrangements had been made. They would work at the new Greek restaurant. The Greek restaurant was on the far side of Los Olivos, which meant that our new neighbors, the Serranos, had to commute more than 6 miles each way on foot. They left in the small hours before dawn and got back after dark. We predicted correctly that their routine was not sustainable. A few weeks into it, we all were dining at the picnic tables at the center of their trailer park when the Serranos approached us. Mother Paz asked if we knew of an easier way to reach Los Olivos, a bus perhaps. No, we assured her. There was no public transportation in this corner of the valley. We were used to walking to the winery, and our children were used to walking a half mile to their high school. Mother Paz snapped her fingers. I should have known. There's always one stitch in the rug that I miss. I've got another idea, though. She'd heard about the Department of Motor Vehicles. She and her sons would probably go there and obtain driver's licenses. If they saved for a few months, she figured they could buy a used car. Nothing fancy, something small would do. We couldn't stop ourselves from laughing. We informed the Serranos of something.
Attention, the library will close to the public in 15 minutes after 8 p.m. The library will remain available to SJSU Spartans with current target cards. Once again, the library will close to the public in 15 minutes.
We couldn't stop ourselves from laughing. We informed the Serranos that they wouldn't be driving on California roads, not in this lifetime. Only citizens were allowed to have licenses. And even citizens would have to take tests, fill out forms, and speak English if they wanted to get behind the wheel of a car. The process was so convoluted, so overfilled with restrictions, that it would be simpler to hijack a crop duster and fly to work instead. Mother Paz was incredulous. Those rules are absurdities, she cried. Again, we laughed. You're not wrong, we said. Even so, you're in the north now, and every dance is a different dance. The following Saturday, the Serranos left the park in the chill of dawn. When they returned several hours later, they were walking one-gear bicycles with knobby tires. The bicycles were teal or hot pink or lime green and low to the ground. Some of them had tasseled handlebars. Clearly they were built for kids. We didn't know how to ride bicycles, and our children didn't know how. It was immediately obvious that the Serranos didn't either, though they wasted no time in trying. They practiced in the evenings. 3 or 4 of them would roll through the trailer park, pushing themselves along with their feet, while the rest used flashlights to illuminate the path ahead. We were glad they had sense enough to wear helmets. Some of the riders managed to lift their legs for a few seconds, but they seemed to spend most of their time crashing to the ground and shouting words that we assumed to be profanities. Mother Paz, who was clumsier than the rest, crashed so many times that her helmet finally broke in two. The young men helped her up, and she shook dirt from her dress. "Remember the proverb," she said. "The devil fell and lost his grace, but not his pride." Minutes later, she was at it again. In the days that followed, the Serranos began to add accessories to their useless bikes: reflectors, baskets, luggage racks, bells. A few of them tied artificial roses to their top tubes. Then came the American flags, the miniature ones you could buy at Walmart. The Serranos attached these to the backs of their seats. There was something particularly annoying about the flags, which seemed to imply that we needed to be reminded of where we lived. Or perhaps the Serranos were foolish enough to believe that Stars and Stripes would save them if they got in trouble in the world beyond Ranch View Mobile Estates. So thank you, Francisco. Thank you for your work as well. I read more, but I'm not very good at reading other people's work. And so I'm going to quit while I'm not too far behind and go to Q&A. So let me just, folks in person, just forgive me for looking at the chat real quick. Yeah, again, if you have questions, and Alexia, why don't we come up and share the stage here? So, yeah, I'm going to give everybody a second to just formulate any questions you have. Also, yes, Amanda is here to answer questions as well. Yeah, I definitely want to focus the attention on our Steinbeck Fellows, Alexia and Amanda. Yeah, so let me go to the audience here first. I'll also monitor the chat. Yeah, any thoughts? Yeah, Noor.
You were talking about how this is an intergenerational novel and the voices are switched between 3 people, 3 generations. How do you decide, with reference to an intergenerational novel, which traits or generational traits to keep and which cycles to break when you're passing down? Like, how does that align with the way you formulate the plot, the story, or is it with the characters? You decide when it's going to change with each character.
Yeah, well, with this novel, I started at the first generation. So I started with the character that you heard from, and I think just by starting from the beginning and just kind of improving, so basically like generating material for the first generation, then going on and then maybe kind of rewriting or looking back at the first while I'm doing the second and then moving on like that. So I feel like it was really in like rewrites that I decided, but I didn't have, I don't feel like I made a decision kind of like this like big overarching decision. I feel like there were more of smaller things, like even like that had to do with like the smaller arcs of each character and what they were up against in their social context, like as they moved in these different spaces and countries and cities and times too. Like the novel has a very large span of time, so yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I see we do have questions in the chat, but could field another question from the in-person audience. Anybody else? Yeah, Aaron.
I'd love to hear from both authors what the inspirations were behind their stories.
All right, and so the question, I'm going to repeat it for the Zoom audience. Aaron would like to know what were the inspirations for your stories, Alexia and Amanda. Amanda, maybe you could go first.
Yeah, inspiration is so tricky because I feel like so many things, big or small, can inspire us, right? Like a certain line from a novel that we're reading or the weather outside, right? Um, yeah, I think my biggest ambition was to write a novel that I think a younger version of myself would have wanted to read, or would have liked to be assigned, to read in like a high school English class or something like that. Um, but yeah, I guess it's hard, right? Thinking about like a single source of inspiration. But that's kind of like always like simmering in the back of my mind when I sit down to write, for better or worse.
Alexia.
Well, I think there are two things. This story is based on migration that my father's side of the family took. So in terms of the kind of overarching like where it is, I was taking inspiration from my family, but the other source was that when I started kind of seriously drafting this novel, and in the course of writing the novel, I had 2 kids. And so my other source of inspiration was becoming a mom, and it just made me think a lot about gender expectations in different social contexts, and it made me curious about these things in the context of characters who would have been in the same places as some of my family members, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna check out a couple of questions online. So Peggy, who is another MFA student, asks, Alexia and Amanda, I'm very interested to hear the background story of both your tales of, actually, that's not so much a question, but very interested to hear the background story of both your tales of family escape journeys. Yeah, as we all are, and thank you for your comment, Peggy. Noelle Breda Williams, who is the chair of the English department, has a question. Okay, that was a quick question. Can someone repeat the questions? Okay. Yes, gotcha, Noelle. Doing that. So, any other questions either online or in person? All right, so Selena Anderson, who is Associate Professor of Creative Writing and the director of our Center for Literary Arts, asks Amanda, I'd love to hear about the way you construct your beautiful descriptions. Yeah, it's just a question on process.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I feel like it's just like such a subconscious thing. I think the moments where I feel the most immersed in the writing process are the moments where I feel the least aware of what's going on, as I sit down to write. But I think something I tell my students when we talk about imagery is, think about the most cliche, the most like overused way of describing something, right? Get that on the page and then throw it away, right? And then search for something a little stranger, a little deeper, maybe a little bit more subversive. So maybe that's also kind of, going on in the background too when I sit down to write.
I was really hoping that you would keep talking through this little announcement, but it's all good. Thank you. I think that's really good advice, and I've thought too about kind of working through levels of sort of like the levels of our consciousness, and from generic thinking through and into more unique thinking. I think that's really wonderful. Peggy asks, both narrators are women reacting to negative fathers. Will there be any reconciliation or enlightenment regarding the fathers in the narratives? Alexia, and then Amanda. Answer however you feel.
I mean, yes, in a way. Like, I think in the section that I read from the narratives, or the character in the scene is very young, and so I think that she's absorbing a lot of things and observing at this point, and she also has a lot of tenderness for her father too. I think like complicated feelings, and so I definitely throughout the story, you get to understand her father in, I think, more complicated ways, and her like relationship to them. So I guess you will have to wait till the book comes out to know.
Yeah, Amanda?
Yeah, I think I have a very similar answer. My narrator is also very young. So in terms of reconciliation, I think empathy and understanding towards her father is a form of reconciliation in some way. But yeah, copying Alexia's answer, you have to kind of wait and see until the book's done. Because I think I'm figuring that out as I'm going too.
Like that. All right. If there any other questions from the in-person audience?
Yeah, Marcelo, Charmaine, yes. Charmaine, please.
Okay. I was wondering how different, if at all, is it to write post-MFA than it is to write during the MFA?
All right, so great question. And for the online audience, Charmaine asks, how different is it to be a writer, to write post-MFA as opposed to being an MFA student? Yeah. Actually, Alexia, you go first.
Sure. I think when you're doing an MFA program, like you have a lot of built-in community and readers and structure, and I think the biggest thing, well, I mean, in my case, like my life outside of MFA, like my home life changed a lot too because I had these kids, and I think that like it really became a matter of just creating the space and like the time to really dedicate to this project, even when nobody's looking at it, nobody cares, nobody you're always having this like kind of feedback and reinforcement mechanism like built into MFA programs, and then that and then you have to make it for yourself. Yeah, I mean, the best thing I did was keep some of the readers from my MFA program and, reading group. And I graduated from my MFA program right before the pandemic, and we did it on Zoom. It was kind of weird, but we did it anyway. And yeah, that was super helpful.
Yeah, and Amanda?
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of that. Something beautiful that the MFA gives you, right, is just the sense of community and being, in a workshop with people who are very much going through what you're going through, whether it's writer's block, whether it's, getting a rejection or two from a literary journal, things like that. So that sense of solidarity is something that you really feel the absence of sometimes when you leave your MFA program. But thankfully, I had a really amazing, close-knit cohort, and we've sort of kept in touch throughout the years. We actually started in the pandemic, so kind of opposite to you, Alexia. But so we started in 2020 over Zoom, and we're on Zoom for the majority of our time. But I think that also has made it a little bit easier to stay in touch as we're all used to the digital interface.
Yeah, thank you. And we have time for a couple more questions. I see we have one in the chat, and Liam, we will get to your question. I want to come to Marcelo first. Okay. Well, Liam, who is like Charmaine, is an incoming MFA student and 24-25 Steinbeck Fellow, graduate student fellow. Liam has questions for both Amanda and Alexia. Amanda, I am wondering how much concentration went into developing your characters' imagined sustenance / comfort / yearning, or if that seemed to come naturally to your characters. Does their imagination become a motif or a reality as the novel develops? And I'll go to that, and then I'll ask Alexia's question after that.
Yeah, so in terms of their desires, I think something great about fiction is that our characters are always wanting something, right? That's what makes for an interesting plot, whether that something is like a promotion or a relationship, or in this case, stability and food and whatnot. As to, let's see, I'm sorry, just reading the question in the chat. It's a great one. Yeah, I think because some of this novel is like loosely based on part of my own lived experience, I think finding a way to sort of safely enter that emotional space has been really key to writing this book. And just, rethinking some of like the physical aspects of the hunger, right? So sometimes if I'm really, really struggling and I want to connect to the characters and their desires, I'll try to make it a little bit more practical. Like maybe I'll skip breakfast or skip lunch just to really feel and be able to really depict and recall that sense of hunger and longing. So.
Right. And
Alexia, I'm wondering, Liam asks, I'm wondering if there's any disillusionment as your characters navigate life in the U.S. Maybe that question is begging for a spoiler. Okay.
And disillusionment. Yeah, yes. I mean, eventually, yeah. So a lot happens there's a big part of the novel is set in Haiti and various places, and then the second generation protagonist immigrates to the United States, and I don't know if I would call it disillusionment as much as the character trying to negotiate, leaving her family and her country behind, and then, just kind of what it means to be in two places at the same time, like one in your head, one and the other in real space. I don't know. So that was kind of more what I was thinking about. I mean, I'd have to think about the disillusionment thing a little more, but I think that's probably in there too. Yeah, no place is perfect, so that's the truth.
Yeah, thank you. And that looks like all the questions we have online, maybe all the questions we have in person. So with that, I want to, just have one more big round of applause. I do have some thank yous I have to say before we get out of here, but yes, and thank you especially, Alexia, for making the trip and for being here. Really appreciate it. Yeah. All right, so just real briefly, y'all. Gotta say the thank yous before you get out of here. So, all right. So first of all, thank you to all the 2023, 2024
Steinbeck Fellows, to Alexia, to Amanda, who is here with us virtually, to Francisco, who is here with us in spirit. I also see that other of our fellows, including AJ Bermudez, perhaps other people here as well. Let me just make sure I'm Sheyo Wang, who is also here online, and Ito Utini, right? Thank you to all of our current Steinbeck Fellows. Thank you also to the fellows, current, past, and future. Thanks to our donors, to Steinbeck Center Director Dr. Daniel Rivers. I also want to make a special thank you to the former director, both of the Steinbeck Center and the former coordinator of the Steinbeck Fellows program, Nick Taylor. Thank you, Nick, for giving me this opportunity to be the coordinator. I think it's especially important, given our, the times we live in and all that, especially that white people with a certain status give, and older people give younger people, that white people give people of color certain opportunities, right, where they have where they are positioned, right, to do so. And so I do appreciate you, Nick. And last but not least, in fact, very much at the head of all the Steinbeck Fellows operations, even though she is oftentimes in the background, is our fearless administrator, Janice Zelaya. Thank you, Janice. Oh, we got one more. Thanks, Tim. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to bid the online audience adieu. Peace. Okay.